mankind, the world's greatest Super Friends.
The year is 1979. Disco is clinging to its final moments of cultural dominance. The Sony Walkman has just hit shelves in Japan, and on Saturday mornings, the most powerful beings in the universe are dealing with something far more terrifying than a cosmic invasion. Yep, they're dealing with a format change. For nearly a decade, the Super Friends have been the undisputed kings of ABC morning lineup. But the tail end of the 70s, the show was at a bit of a crossroads. It had to survive the low-stakes mystery solving of the early years and the cosmic grandeur of the challenge of the Super Friends. But as the decade drew to a close, Hanna-Barbera decided to strip things back and lean into the just plain weird and give us a season that remains one of the most fascinating snapshots of DC Comics history ever to be put on celluloid. Today we are diving deep into the often overlooked, frequently bizarre, and undeniably charming fourth season of the Super Friends. This is the era of the world's greatest Super Friends.
It's a bit of a stretch, don't you think?
To understand where we were in 1979, we have to just look back at where we had been in 1978. Hanna-Barbera had peaked with the challenge of the Super Friends, that's for sure. That was the season that gave us the Legion of Doom, the massive 13-member roster led by the ruthless Lex Luthor and the iconic headquarters, the Darth Vader-esque Hall of Doom.
The Legion of Doom.
It was like a localized version of a summer blockbuster. However, the production was exhausting and expensive. When it came time to gear up for the 1979 season, the network and the studio decided to shift gears. They moved away from the sprawling war between the Justice League and the Legion of Doom and returned to a more intimate and character-focused dynamic. The source material remained the Justice League of America comics, but the influence of the thriving Bronze Age of comics was starting to bleed through to the cartoon. The industry was moving towards more sophisticated storytelling, and while the Super Friends was still strictly for kids, you could feel the writers trying to push the boundaries of what a half-hour adventure could be. The fourth season, officially titled The World's Greatest Super Friends, made its debut on the 22nd of September 1979 on the ABC network. Unlike the large episode orders of previous years, this season was a leaner, meaner machine consisting of only 8 episodes. However, don't let that small number fool you. These weren't just standard adventures. They were often atmospheric, leading into heavily into like the science fiction and even gothic horror tropes. The show occupied a prime slot in the Saturday morning schedule, usually airing around the 8 a.m. mark, serving as the anchor for the network's animation block. Produced by the legendary duo of William Hanna and Joseph Barbera, this season maintained the high-energy aesthetic that had become the studio's trademark, even if the animation industry began to struggle and grapple with the rising costs of the increased use of overseas outsourcing to maintain the weekly grind of the show.
I don't know how much longer we can keep this up!
Behind the scenes, the production was a well-oiled machine led by executive producers Hanna and Barbera, with the legendary Iowa Takemoto overseeing the character designs. One of the most defining elements of this show was the voice cast, with the definitive voices of these characters for a whole generation of kids, with the usual suspects of Denny Dark's booming authoritative Superman voice, Casey Kasem's youthful and earnest Robin, and Olin Soul's sophisticated and slightly older Batman. We also had Shannon Farren as Wonder Woman with her motherly tone, and last but not least, Bill Calloway as Aquaman, the King of the Seas. Despite the chemistry of the cast, the production faced the usual significant hurdles, primarily from the dreaded standards and practices. By 1979, the crackdown on the television violence was an all-time high. The superheroes couldn't punch anymore, they couldn't kick, and they certainly couldn't use their powers in a way that looked like it might actually hurt a sentient being. This led to the old creative problem solving that defined that era of the cartoon. Superman would wrap a villain in a lamppost, or Wonder Woman would use her lasso to redirect a falling boulder. It forced the writers to focus on environmental hazards and science gone wrong scenarios rather than just some straight up fisticuffs.
I've started a crusade against cartoon violence.
When the show finally hit the airwaves in the fall of '79, the reception was a bit of a mixed bag. For those who'd grown accustomed to the epic scale of the Legion of Doom battles, however, the ratings actually remained pretty rock solid. Kids didn't mind that the roster had been trimmed down to the big five of Superman, Batman, Robin, Wonder Woman, and Aquaman, supplemented by the Wonder Twins and Gleek. Now, the fourth season leaned into a storyteller vibe, with many episodes feeling like self-contained morality plays of high concept sci-fi shorts, if you know what I mean. It faced stiff competition from NBC's Godzilla and Globetrotters Hour and CBS's New Adventures of Mighty Mouse and Heckle and Jekyll, but the DC brand carried a weight that the others just could not match. It was the prestige superhero show of its day, even if that prestige involved Superman, Batman and Wonder Woman being turned into a combined Frankenstein monster. Speaking of Frankensteins, Season 4 is perhaps the best remembered for its dip into the, shall we say, strange and supernatural. One of the most famous episodes from its run is The Lord of Middle-earth, which feels like it's a direct response to the popularity of the J.R.R. Tolkien's work following the 1978 animated Lord of the Rings film. Then there was the Superfriends meet Frankenstein, that old classic trope that has been used for decades, from Albert and Costello meet Frankenstein to Scooby-Doo meets Frankenstein. God, and even Alvin and the Chipmunks got in on it.
Alvin and the Chipmunks.
Here we come!
Meet Frankenstein.
Making Frankenstein's monster the most connected guy in Hollywood.
The most famous actor in America.
Trivia buffs often point out that this is the season that reused a significant amount of background art and character models from, obviously, 1978 season to save on the good old budget, a common Hanna-Barbera tactic. This was also the peak era for the Mego toy line, and while the show didn't always align perfectly with the action figures on the shelves, the synergy between the screen and the toy aisle was undeniable.
Those toys were everywhere.
For decades, this fourth season pretty much existed primarily in the memories of us Gen Xers and in grainy VHS bootlegs traded at comic book conventions. But there was nothing official for the season for many years. It was only until the mid-2000s that Warner Brothers Home Video finally gave the fans what they wanted. The World's Greatest Super Friends was released as a standalone DVD set on the 23rd of April 2013, only featuring the 8 episodes with no featurettes compared to the earlier challenge sets that had some really good featurettes. Now, more recently, on the 10th of September 2024, Warner Brothers released the remastered Blu-ray set of the entire Super Friends series box set with all the 93 episodes from all 9 seasons of the show, remastered for Blu-ray, providing a major improvement in picture and sound quality. And as of now, there has been no plans for any 4K HD release.
Something needs to be done about this.
Well, look, I can't say if I ever saw any of these episodes before when I was a kid, but that's not to say that I didn't see any of them. It's just that I can't recall any of these episodes, if you know what I mean. And this kind of felt like a nice, fresh sit down and watch to see what this is like. And oh my God. My God, oh my God, why did they go back to this old format and scrap the Legion of Doom?
What do you mean you don't know?
Yeah, okay, look, yeah, I do know why. I just literally went through it a few minutes ago. But I mean, as a fan, why did they do that? The challenge of the Super Friends was so great. And then turning around and going back to this format was a mistake in my eyes as a fan. That is it. And that's not even getting into them scraping the bottom of the barrel for story ideas from the public domain properties that might have had a slight name change or appearance change, etc. This is it the worst season? No, I think it's still the first season for me, but even if the episodes are weird and wonderful, it's still the Super Friends and it's still great to watch. So I think I'll still give this a solid 8, even though they're bad episodes of the Super Friends. But to me, even a bad episode of the Super Friends is better than most of the cartoons nowadays on their good days.
It's true.
The legacy of the 1979 season is one of transition. It represents the bridge between the campy, experimental 1970s and the more toy-driven, action-orientated 1980s. While some critics dismiss it as a placeholder season because of its short episode count and its influence, well, maybe not as big as some of the other seasons, it is still a vital piece of a bigger picture of building a brand that today is still being talked about, like right now. It proved that the Justice League could be flexible. They didn't always need a world-ending threat to be interesting. Sometimes they just needed to fight a giant space monster or navigate a magical kingdom. It solidified the Big Five as pillars of the DC universe in the minds of millions and millions of children who grew up to be the writers and directors of today's superhero blockbusters. Look, in the end, the world's greatest Super Friends Season 4 stands out as a vibrant time capsule. It captures a moment when superheroes were purely more about wonder and imagination, you know, before they became the gritty, complex figures that we see today in modern cinema. It was a time when the biggest worry in the world was whether the Wonder Twins could activate their powers in a time to save the day. It might be flawed, the animation might loop more than a GIF, and the dialogue might be a little on the nose at times. But there is an undeniable heart at the center of it all. It's a reminder of a Saturday morning ritual that brought all of us together. And for that reason, the 1979 season will always have a place in the Hall of Justice. Next week on the show, we are going to look at the Rocketeer movie from 1991. It's a 90s classic that I can't wait to rewatch. Thanks for watching.